Well, thank you. Well, you know, those of us in the forecasting business know that you can get accolades one year and then be in infamy or ignominy, ignominy the next year. So that's the nature of the forecasting business. Well, I don't think anybody on this panel is going to say that, yes, that it's enough, because it's never enough, and especially not when you're coming from where Greece has come from, you know, after these crisis decade. The Greek economy has been growing above the speed limits in the Eurozone, but I think that tells us very little about where Greece stands today and where it's going. I think perhaps we should be asking whether recent growth rates are fast enough and also if they're sustainable, and if not, what needs to change. The crisis revealed some very big structural imbalances, lasted for 10 years. Then in 2019, when the present government came into office for its first term, the economy started to turn the corner. It was then hit by the pandemic. Real GDP collapsed again. The recovery in 21 was from a very low base. Then the energy crisis unfolded in 2022 after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So actually, really, we are looking only at 2023 to 2024 in terms of growth to give us an indication of where the Greek economy is at the moment. And the fact that the Greek economy grew at rates above 2%, 2.3% on average in those 2 years, that's a really positive sign, but it's not clear yet whether that is a trend that can be sustained over the long term. In its forecast for the Greek economy recently, the European Commission said that GDP growth in Greece in 2025 to 2026 is set to continue exceeding the long-term potential growth rate. So the implication of that is that all the reforms that have been implemented to date have had some very positive results, but they have not yet pushed the economy to a higher growth trajectory. Our forecast is very positive for Greece, actually over the next 5 years. Greece can probably sustain growth rates above 2% over the next few years as investment rebounds from the low levels to which it sank during the crisis. But without some radical changes, over the longer term, the economy will return to the long-term potential growth rate, which most economists at the moment, I think the consensus is that's around 1.1%. So what I'm saying is more radical policies are now needed to raise productivity growth rates. And historically, Greece has been one of the worst performers in Europe in that regard. It's rising, productivity growth is rising, but it still remains below the EU average. So I think, you know, how Greece can do that is the big issue, and you know we can come back to that. How do we go about that?
Of course, also on productivity, but representing, Michael, the Greek government, let's say. What has been achieved so far, and how you intend to capitalize on this?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. I think that it is clear that progress has been made over the last 6 years. Let me briefly say that those areas that led to the Greek crisis of the previous decade have greatly improved. So the fiscal performance of Greece is much improved. Indeed, we have now very good fiscal numbers. Public debt, although still remains the highest in the EU, is on a fast downward trend. The banking sector has been recovering. The results there are very encouraging. The banking sector has started financing again the real economy. And the macro outlook is quite positive. Unemployment is at its lowest levels for many years. Yesterday, the numbers were very encouraging. And the process of convergence to the EU average has resumed as a result of higher growth rates than the EU average. Also, another thing which is very positive is the fact that we have some signs that the Greek economy is rebalancing towards a healthier mix of economic activity. So the investment ratio to GDP is increasing, although it is not there where we want it, but it is increasing. We have covered half of the investment gap relative to the EU average since 2019. There is an expanding manufacturing sector, which is not the case in many European countries. So the percentage of manufacturing in the Greek economy increases, both in terms of GDP and employment. And there are areas where Greece has been making significant progress. Mr. Skylakakis knows much better than me the progress that we have done in the area of energy. Last year, Greece was a net exporter in electricity generation. And all these things have happened at a very difficult and challenging international environment, so the Greek economy has shown resilience. Now, this progress has been acknowledged by markets. You know that Greece has recovered the investment grade from all major credit rating agencies. The market outcomes in terms of spreads are good. And also, we have had increasing foreign direct investment inflows. Now, all these things are positive, but as you rightly say, we are not yet there where we would like to be, so as to say that we have completed, if you like, the effort of achieving the convergence to the EU average. So there is a very big agenda, which probably we will touch upon later in this discussion, but I agree that the two main, if you like, objectives would be A, to increase investment further, because investment, of course, increases if you like, the production capacity of the Greek economy, especially at the time of demographic pressures. And second, and very important, is that we should push further for an increase in productivity. Productivity has been increasing. Mainly, the increase in productivity over the last 6 years has come from the capital side, so we should continue that, but we should also redouble our efforts to increase the productivity of Greek labor.
George, does the OECD think the same, or actually, what does the OECD say on this?
Well, looking at the Greek economy from the standpoint of the OECD, and it's an observatory of 38 countries, the most developed economies in the world, there are two ways of looking at it. One is to see where Greece is placed comparatively with OECD countries, and there you have several cases where Greece is leading, but in many cases, Greece is lagging the OECD average. But the most important, I think, is to see the distance that has been covered since 2019, 2020. If you compare the improvements that have been registered for Greece compared to the OECD countries, you see Greece leading in a wide number of indicators. And I think that is important, the delta, as we could put it, the distance that has been covered and the speed of adjustment and reforms, and the whole brand of Greece as a success story, a story of recovery, I think makes a huge difference because it also leads the expectations of market players, and the expectations deliver actual behavior on the ground. So in all these areas that have been mentioned by Michalis, the public debt reduction rate since 2020-21 is the largest, I would say, internationally. The employment gains every year Greece is leading in these. I would mention one example, which I think is quite interesting, the regulatory environment, the business environment in terms of simplifying regulations. Greece was invited last year to present to the OECD its experience as the most successful country in terms of the progress made in the improvement of the regulatory environment for business. We presented our experience to the other OECD member states as a success story in improving the context in which businesses are called to operate. Just last week, Greece was mentioned in an OECD survey as a best case, as a success story regarding the reform, investment, licensing, and inspections in terms of simplification of the environment for business. So all these are differences and changes that can deliver actual improvement of the ground, even if that improvement is not yet visible, because they create exactly the conditions for private investment to flow in, for FDI to flow in. We see an increasing part of this directed to manufacturing and technology. We see, for example, a growing ecosystem in technology areas, in digital, in AI, which will be further strengthened with the arrival of one of the first 7 EU AI factories in Greece. So these are changes that are going to deliver their fruits in the years to come. And of course, they are based on sustainable public finances. In a recent graph, which I found probably one of the most interesting graphs I've seen in the OECD, Greece over the next decades is the only country where pension spending is not going to further burden the public budget. The only country with a stable or negative growth of fiscal spending because of the pension reforms that have been already implemented. So these are important changes, and I think they create the preconditions for sustainable recovery that will trickle down in a more visible way.
Thank you, George. Giovanni, we are at the round, within the round of questions that are focusing on what has been achieved. But John just has already referred to the lag in productivity in Greece. So I would also like to ask you what structural reforms or policy priorities should be accelerated to close this gap. And are there any similar case studies from other countries that Greece should focus on?
Thank you, John, and thank you for inviting me here. It's great. I'm really learning a lot. And let me pick up briefly before going to your question on the growth performance of Greece, really highlighting the remarkable performance over the last years on two aspects that I think are very important. First of all is the fight to tax evasion and the revenue over performance. This is a critical step forward of Greece. It's really creating the resources to fix the fiscal problems that have been fixed, that were at the basis of the troubles of the past decade, and really is bringing and generating a lot of confidence through also the rating agency decisions. The other part that is also extremely important, NPLs. I mean, and this is really a two-way interaction. Fixing the NPL problem, the non-performing loan problem, liberating space for credit is something that helps growth, and growth in turn helps fixing the non-performing loan problem. So there's still some way to go there, but the progress has been very immense. Let me then get back to your question, John. That very much is the question that is under the whole panel here. Is this enough, right? Is this enough for the medium term? Is this enough to fix productivity? Well, rather simply, I would say, no, it's not. And it's not because there is nothing that is enough. Not for Greece, not for any other country. I mean, yesterday we had very fascinating discussions, the intervention for Professor Acemoglu, the 5 big trends. Yesterday night, while I was thinking about my intervention today, I was thinking, okay, what is that is likely to be around in 5 years, or 10 years' time? And the only thing that I think will be very likely over the medium term is that nothing or many things will be radically different from what they are now. So the key word here is dynamism. It's a mentality, it's an approach, it's an attitude. It's very hard to identify a recipe, a set of reforms, because we don't know what the future has in front of us. It is more an issue of really reading the reality, understanding what are the needs, and be in a situation of continuous reform efforts, letting the political cycle overcome these reform efforts that the government have been following steadily, continuously over the last years would be a really big mistake. I mean, we all know, you know better than me, I mean, the origin of the dynamism word in Greek means power, strength, energy. A strong economy these days is an economy that can really give the signal and the perception of investors that is agile, that is able to respond to shocks. And this is what Greece has consistently been doing. Let me just give a little sign. I'm seeing they're running out of time, but on the signs that can tell us that we are on the right path of medium term is when Greece will be able to attract smart people with smart ideas. When you see this happening at scale, would there be Greek people that left the country and are coming back, or people that elect Greece as a place to stay? This means that the reform effort has been convincing, credible, and has touched all the different parts of the economy. We see signs of this, but there is still some way to go.
Mrs. Skylakakis, we are closing the first round, which focuses on what has been achieved, but the question is it enough? Is the progress enough? Will it, can you determine, can you say what would be enough, actually? Because it's an ongoing process, as Giovanni said.
Well, I always like to be more specific and be data-driven. Now, what has happened in the last 5 years and has fueled growth in Greece is a remarkable reduction of unemployment. It went from 17% in July 2019, when this government came, to 7.9 are the last data. This is very important, but 7.9 is close to a structural unemployment in Greece. So the unemployment growth, the growth coming from reduction of unemployment, has run its course. What has not run its course is investment growth, because Greece still has a serious, very serious investment gap compared to the Eurozone average. Greece was at 11% investment as percentage of GDP, which was the lowest in the Eurozone and in Europe. It has gone to 16%, but the European average is 21%. So we have a 5 points of GDP investment gap. And this must be the #1 policy priority in the country. Now, we have achieved, and there are some very big advantages to attract investments. I believe that in terms of fiscal clarity, Greece maybe has the best books in the world due to what happened in the last decade. We have the most clean fiscal picture than any other country, and I would say compared to many other European countries as well. And we have a very strong and positive fiscal path, which is important in an era where, for example, the US, Jerome Powell says the US does not have fiscal sustainability. So this is a big advantage. The second advantage is energy. Energy prices are going to drop in the next couple of years because there are huge energy investments that have started and will be finished in the next couple of years. We'll add about 4 gigawatts of renewables in the next 2 to 3 years. So energy prices will drop, and we also have political stability, at least for the next couple of years, and hopefully a lot more. So what we need now to do is not just accelerate reforms, but target them and think again about reforms. We must rethink reforms, because now we have a totally new environment, and what was a very ambitious reform program in 2019 has to be revisited and reinvented in 2025 for the country to go forward in the next 2 to 5 years.
This will be my next question. What do you mean by rethinking reforms? But let's be a bit forward-looking, and I will turn to John. John, you referred to the need to accelerate growth. And you also referred to structural barriers that are there and Greece needs to overcome. So what has to be done in order to improve the potential growth trajectory of Greece?
Well, first of all, I agree with the Minister and his emphasis on investment, and more particularly the emphasis on rethinking reforms, because I think we shouldn't underestimate the political dimension to all this and what needs to be done. And the importance of having agency. I think that was something that the Prime Minister really emphasized last night as well. I mean, he talked about trust and accountability, which is based on delivering, which is what the government has done in its first term. It's not to say everything is perfect, but it has delivered in many areas that have made a substantive difference. And saying that it's not enough is not to belittle, what's been achieved so far. What's been done has put Greece very much on the right track and in a much stronger position than it was just a few years ago. But when economists talk about the long-term potential growth rate being around 1.1%, they are talking about the kind of structural barriers. Now, I think there is a large amount of fatalism in some of that discussion, which I really think needs to be avoided. So one of the main structural barriers is seen to be the demographic trends in Europe generally, but particularly in Greece. If you look at the long-term UN projections for growth, you can see that Greece is going to have one of the steepest declines in terms of the working age population between now and 2050. That's going to fall from about 6.5 million in 2023 to 4.9 million in 2050. And the consensus is that this sort of adverse demographic outlook is going to have a severely negative effect on long-term real GDP growth rate. So that idea that demographics is destiny, that was popularized by that 19th century French philosopher Auguste Comte, it's turned into a kind of fatalism. And I don't think we should, accept the view that a declining population is inevitably bad for growth. Many other factors actually are very important in shaping what happens. I mean, first of all, level of development, starting position. Technological advancements, absolutely critical, I think. Obviously, economic policies and the choices that are made by governments are really crucial. Social and political institutions, also important. The quality of human capital, all these things actually are equally important. Now, some of these factors are a kind of given. There's not that much that you can do about it. Starting position, demographics, there's only so much you can do in terms of trying to grow the population. Other things are slow burners in terms of reform, so institutions, but they're also very important, what's happening with the judicial reforms and so on. So if Greece can do the right thing in policy areas, it can start to improve the potential growth trajectory. And I think critically, improving productivity, labor force participation is important now. Greece lags, there's a lot that can be done here, and the government started to do it. Greece lags behind in participation rates, particularly of women, but also of older people. The IMF recently published a report in April about the silver economy, and I think there's a lot that Greece can do here as well, to not just in terms of raising retirement age and so on, but in terms of bringing older people back into the economy and obviously improving the situation with youth unemployment as well. Just final point, that even those policies in terms of improving labor force participation and boosting productivity growth in that way, that's not even, I think, going to be enough. And I think the critical thing is the technological advances and the focus on that, because we need to see a much more radical restructuring of the economy, a shifting of resources and investments away from low productivity businesses and sectors into higher productivity businesses and the industries of the future that can actually provide better paid jobs. So, I mean, that is a massive challenge. And, maybe we can close in the end about whether we think the government is up to doing that. And I would emphasize that the government has shown already a willingness to take on vested interests and do things that haven't, shake things up. But I think if it wins a third term, which I think it's got a very good chance of doing, I think it needs to be more disruptive.
Let's go to the government. So, looking ahead, which reforms, Michael, do you consider the most crucial, and which of them are feasible within this electoral cycle?
So I think that we are all mainly thinking in terms of the same lines. So going forward, in order to continue outperforming the EU average, there are, I think, basically two prerequisites. The first, and quite obvious, is to sustain, maintain, and even strengthen the hard-won gains in terms of the fiscal progress we have had, the macro stabilization and the banking improvement. These are conditions that have been achieved to a large extent, and they should be maintained. So, having said that, the next step, I agree, is to have an improvement in the structure of the Greek economy, and this implies that we need to shift now more our attention to the micro side of the Greek economy. We have done, I think, a fairly good job in the macro over the previous years. Now it is time to see how can we improve further the micro. We have done a lot of progress there, and the Economist has acknowledged it in terms of, classifying Greece as one of the fastest improving economies in recent years on the micro side. But I agree with the minister that we should aim to increase the investment ratio in the GDP further and increase productivity. Now, let me mention very briefly the specific of this. When it comes to becoming friendlier for investment, I think that we need to look at the deregulation agenda, which is a European agenda. We have done progress there, but it is true that we can do things easier and simpler for potential investors. I think that we have done a lot of good work in terms of improving the institutional performance of the country. The digitalization progress has been very, very good. Nevertheless, the back office of the Greek civil service continues to pose difficulties to investors. So this is a very big agenda which has to do with how we reform the Greek civil service in a way which is rewarding people, but at the same time ensures good standards and productivity in the public sector. The justice system, there are significant steps of progress. Nevertheless, there are things to be done there. Land uses, again, Minister Skylakakis is much more expert than me, but this is also an agenda where we can improve. The financing of investment is also another area where we can improve. The banks are now lending to enterprises. Nevertheless, we can develop the finance universe further, and there are certain good developments in capital markets in recent days, as you have seen. The competition agenda is very important. George mentioned that we have done a lot of progress in competition in the goods market, and it shows in the OECD rankings, but we can also increase competition, particularly in the services sector. We have the human capital agenda, which is huge. Again, we have done progress in education, a major reform with private universities, non-state universities coming in the country as from this September, but we can also take back the brain drain of the previous crisis, last decade. And we have improved a lot in our FDI, but again, we can help people who are prospective investors in Greece further. Incentivizing labor market participation is another huge agenda. We have done progress. Minister Tsakloglou, who's here, has passed a very good law which increased the participation of people that were retirees coming back in the labor market. But again, you are absolutely right. We should think the incentives we give to people as to become active. We have done progress, but we can do better. So this is a list of things we can do in order to improve investment. Investment itself will increase productivity. And last but not least, the productivity agenda, in my view, has three main axes. First, we need to scale up Greek firms. Greek firms, when they grow in size, the evidence shows that they become as productive as the European firms. So with a significant margin of improvement for scaling up, I see a significant margin for improving productivity. The second thing is that we need a rebalancing of the Greek economy towards higher value economic activity. Again, we are doing progress there, but still 75% of the Greek manufacturing production is classified as low or low-medium tech. 25%, which is high or high-medium, is a big improvement compared to the past, but there is also scope for improvement there. And finally, there is a very significant growth opportunity in the services sector. The globalization process in recent years is driven by the increase in the volume of international trade in exports. This is an area where Greece is doing well in tourism and shipping, but we have been lagging behind certain exports of services where we could be much more successful. I speak about digital services, I speak about professional services, I speak about information and communication technology services. So this is an area where we should invest, and I am sure that this will increase long-term growth.
As I can see, we won't have time for a third round of questions, so I have to adjust a bit the questions that I have prepared. George, despite the progress we are talking about, there is some criticism that Greece does not implement crucial reforms or sensitive reforms from a political perspective, let's say. How do you respond to this? How does the OECD respond to this? And given the fact that now the international environment is not the international environment that Greece has implemented the reform agenda so far.
Yeah, well, companies very often say that even if you do very well, you cannot escape your macros. And by the same token, and no country can escape its global environment if that is an environment of uncertainty. What the country can show, however, is resilience and adaptability to changes. And I think what has been established over the last few years and has been pointed out, even I recall the latest OECD economic outlook, where it is pointed out that Greece has demonstrated remarkable resilience in the face of successive shocks that affected the Greek economy very forcefully, all the way from COVID onwards. We are in an environment that is changing constantly. What is important is that we improve the structural capacity of the economy. These are all the changes, and the shopping list that Michael mentioned, which is very exhaustive. It's exactly what we need to keep on doing. The structural transformation of the Greek economy is happening gradually, but we are gaining pace and we are adjusting, we are converging year by year closer to the EU and the OECD, doing it in a much more sustainable manner. There are areas that clearly need to be focused upon, and a lot has been said about productivity. This is the major challenge, how we can accelerate productivity growth in Greece. It's not easy in the sense that it is associated exactly with what Michael said, the very small size of businesses, the extensive self-employment in the Greek economy. These are choices that go back to the sort of the foundations of Greek society and the cultural underpinnings that cannot change very easily. But we need to change them if we are to improve the performance of the Greek economy. And of course, the labor shortages, despite the gains in employment, despite the very impressive reduction, a fast reduction in unemployment, remain a very important challenge. We need to improve on vocational training, on addressing skills mismatches, despite the fact that unemployment remained high, as it was still higher than a EU average. There were still companies that could not find the kind of human capital that they were looking for. We need to improve the match between the skills that are provided by educational and training system and the skills that are required by our businesses. And of course, increase labor participation. This can never be overemphasized. We need to do that by increasing women's participation, youth participation in the labor market, and older workers' participation through greater flexibility, through extending their participation in the labor force. Greece has championed the establishment of the OECD Crete Center for Population Dynamics, which is exactly aimed to address all the challenges related and deriving from the demographic challenge. And it is not just a matter of fertility, it is a matter of the challenges related to longevity. Longevity is a good thing for our societies, but it means that we have to change the way in which we organize our labor markets, we organize our skill building and training and education systems, and the way in which we use technology in order to empower people in the labor market, including the so-called silver economy. So all these are structural changes that require constant adaptability and a constant speed of responsiveness to external changes that are happening and to which we need to adjust.
Thank you very much, George. Giovanni, given the current challenging international environment, global environment, how can the ESM help Greece going forward?
Well, the ESM is its mandate is a crisis management organization, and many connects them with situation of difficulty or crisis. But I like very much the metaphor that also many in our organization use of the firefighters. We are here to prevent also fires from happening, prevents also for a crisis to happen. And we interact a lot with Greece, as we do also with other countries. Greece is no special in the sense we're exchanging our analysis, exchanging our views. Every time I come here I learn a lot from interaction with Michalis and the other members of the government, and I really hope that also our analysis helps the Greek authorities understanding how the environment is changing around us. Let me really go back to the concept of dynamism that I was stressing before. If we do not understand the environment around us, we cannot be dynamic enough in order to convince markets that Greece is, and the country and the economy is a good place for investment. And so this is something that we are strongly committed in terms of real crisis prevention. Then the ESM is part in the big architecture in the euro area of providing insurance. And it is in a time like this one in which risks are so difficult to quantify, and the tail risk, in the big distribution of events, the more extreme ones are becoming more likely and more difficult to understand in their impact, in their consequences. Getting insurance, it's an important role. And the ESM, again, to Greece, as it does for all the other euro area member states, is stand ready to really provide the type of support that can insure against risks that could happen in terms of market access, in terms of other elements, and is there to reduce the cost of dealing with these risks. So it's very much an effort that we are doing to really bring away the memory of the crisis time. We are past that. We are past this time clearly, and to be ready, getting ready to deal with the crisis or the challenges or the issues of the future. To be honest, Greece is probably one of the countries that is better prepared, also in terms of buffers, in terms of structure of its government debt, to deal with volatility in the overall market, and markets know this very, very well. For instance, and I think that also part of this is due, most of it is due to the reform efforts and the sacrifices endured by the countries over many years, and the more recent reform efforts, but also it's due to a support that came from the European side, the NGU side. There is one anecdote that I just wanted to clearly to share. I mean, at the ESM, indeed, in our crisis preparedness and prevention, we really monitor market quite closely, and we ask market participants almost on a daily basis for their views. It's not really my job, but I do that from time to time because I like to get the pulse. And I was asking how I'm a portfolio manager in a hedge fund, how do you see the core and periphery countries going? And usually the interaction is very fast. No? They talk very fast, they answer very fast. Then there was a silence. What happened? The guy told me, who are core countries? Who are periphery countries? What I mean to say is that we are in a different environment. New generations that look at Europe and the homogeneity between European countries in a very different way. That sometimes our mindset of my generation does. So at the ESM, we are really committed to look through these changes that are happening, these different perceptions, to create a consensus on what is needed across all the different member states.
Thank you, Giovanni. I promised the final question would be this. What do you consider, Theodore, as rethinking reforms? Can you elaborate a bit on this?
Well, rethinking reforms. Let's start by yesterday's very interesting discussion between the Prime Minister and the professor Atsemoglu. We are talking about AI coming, and it's coming in the next 5-10 years in a way that we cannot really project. And at the same time, we're talking about demographics hurting Greece because we won't have enough labor. But will AI societies need more labor? What I see coming is societies having more leisure time. And Greece has a huge competitive advantage when it comes to leisure time. People will have more time to spend. And Greece's competitive advantage, we would call it with the old marketing word, location, location, location. So what we must do is prepare for the world that is coming and not the world that we used to be. And you can resolve the problem of demographics if you look at your migration policy and stop illegal or undocumented migration, but go into legal migration to cover real workforce needs and to get exactly what workforce you want for the time that you want it. So there are things when we start thinking outside of the box that are totally new. For example, at least in Europe, we don't have in the last 20 years a legal migration policy. We are, all the countries are fighting within themselves with the concept of migration that we cannot control. Thinking again outside of the box, we need a constitutional change in Greece to be able to handle land use a lot more efficiently. Again, outside of the box. We don't measure public sector productivity. Mm-hmm. Public goods in Greece are there is very, very low productivity in the production of public goods in Greece. We should measure and raise public sector productivity. There are a lot of things that we can and must do, but we must think differently from what we were thinking, because the world is going into an era of big disruption. And this big disruption that we are facing, we cannot resolve with old policies. I still have the manuals of reforms of the 90s. We must throw them away and rethink. That's my opinion.
We have a bit more time, so I will return to John. Mr. Skylakakis referred to some crucial reforms or some crucial sectors that Greece needs to implement reforms on them. But what makes you believe that things that haven't changed so far can change in the near future and boost productivity, of course?
Okay, just to pick up again on what the minister just said, I think he said much more eloquently what I was trying to say about a smaller working age population does not equate necessarily to smaller output, and that's the point. We are entering this brave new world where it's even very hard to predict what kind of world that's going to be. But GDP growth or output is a function of productivity growth or output per worker, and the issue is, what kind of work, which kind of jobs, and how they are performed, whether in the private sector. And as you say, we also need to look at productivity in the public sector as well. So I think, we do need more thinking outside the box. So what makes me think that Greece can do now, maybe what it hasn't done in the past, even though notwithstanding the accomplishments of the past 7 years, I think, as I said before, in the end, it becomes a political question about the policy, about the vision of the government, about the policy choices the government makes, and whether it has not just the political will, to see something through that is going to be actually quite disruptive and maybe even quite painful. I think it's about having the organization in place to carry through, a particular vision. And I think that was something that probably surprised everybody about Greece in the first term of, the government really prepared in advance. unlike many other governments in Europe, what it was going to do when it came to power. Now, when you're getting into a second term or even maybe a third term, I think the temptation is, to settle for what you've already done, for what already exists, rather than to do something really different and even, revolutionary. And obviously, you need to do that and take the population with you. I mean, that is the challenge. I actually have quite a lot of hope that might be possible. I think, Greece has done something that not many governments in Europe have actually been doing recently. It had a vision, it had a plan. I'm not saying it's perfect. There's many things that, haven't been done. There's still many problems. We've seen, corruption scandals, all sorts of things going on. So there's still a lot that needs to be done. But I think in terms of that, taking seriously agency and believing that actually some of the problems are solvable, that's what's been lost, and that is a political issue. And before we solve any problems with AI, we talked about this the other day, I think we have to restore belief in the capacity, our own capacity, to bring about, positive change. And sometimes you get the feeling that many governments actually secretly no longer believe that the problems are solvable. So I think it's a political issue at the end of the day. So, it's down to who's in power and what they do.